The Voranthi hegemony did not fall in a single dramatic moment, but crumbled piece by piece over the course of 6 months. Each defection and revolt weakening the structure until nothing remained. But the memory of Powhai Speaker Varth fled the council chambers when Kellori security forces refused to protect him any longer. Disappearing into the refugee streams he had once dismissed as evidence of galactic weakness, the council that had declared humanity illegal disbanded itself without ceremony. Its final act, the transmission, acknowledging that the authority it had claimed for millennia no longer existed in any meaningful form. What rose in its place was something new, built not on domination, but on principles that the old order would have considered impossibly naive. The Sanctuary Compact sent diplomats rather than conquerors, offering treaties that recognized the sovereignty of every species willing to negotiate. In good faith, they did not demand tribute or submission, only a commitment to basic rights that the Council had always treated as inconvenient obstacles to efficient governance. The transition was not peaceful everywhere, and some former Council powers fought to maintain their positions through force when persuasion failed, but each time a warlord or dictator rose to challenge the new order, they found themselves facing not just human ships, but fleets crewed by dozens of species who had learned from humanity that standing together was stronger than standing alone. Thuvan, the Kellori researcher who had first noticed the patterns no one wanted to see, found herself appointed to a tribunal tasked with investigating council crimes against sentient beings. The evidence she uncovered filled data archives larger than most planetary libraries, documenting centuries of exploitation, genocide, and deliberate suppression of any species that threatened the established hierarchy. She worked alongside humans and Raxian members of species she had never encountered, all united by a determination to ensure that the galaxy understood exactly what had been done in its name. Former counselors faced justice in proceedings broadcast across every world, their defenses ranging from denial to justification to tearful pleas for mercies. Some were imprisoned on rehabilitation worlds where they would spend decades confronting the consequences of their decisions. Others, like Counselor Veth, who had risked everything to help end the war from within, were pardoned and given positions in the new Galactic Assembly where their knowledge of the old system could help prevent its patterns from repeating. Admiral Korath presented the most difficult case. A warrior who had followed orders and served a system he genuinely believed was right. Commander Park visited him in detention before the tribunal rendered its verdict. Sitting across from the defeated admiral in a small room that offered no comfort or threat, "You could have destroyed us," Korath said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent months wrestling with questions he had never before considered. "Your ships had us trapped and helpless, and you could have killed every one of us." "Yes," Park agreed simply. "Why did you not?" Park was silent for a long moment, considering how to explain something that seemed obvious to him, but clearly mystified the Voranthi warrior. "Because killing you would not have changed anything," he finally said. "The Council would have used your deaths to justify more violence, and the cycle would have continued until nothing remained but ashes and grievances." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Korath's with an intensity that demanded attention. "We wanted to prove that there was another way. That strength did not require cruelty, and that victory did not require annihilation." Korath shook his head slowly, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. "I do not understand your people. You are not required to understand us," Park replied. "You are only required to choose what you will do with the rest of your life." The tribunal offered Korath the same choice it offered all former military leaders whose crimes fell short of direct genocide. He could accept imprisonment, or he could dedicate his remaining years to rebuilding what he had helped destroy, working under the supervision of those he had once sought to exterminate. Krith chose to rebuild, though whether from genuine remorse or simple pragmatism, even he could not say for certain. The formal establishment of the new Galactic Assembly took place on Varanthos, the same station where humanity had been declared illegal 50 years before. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the great chamber, many of them descendants of those the council had oppressed, and others who had willingly abandoned the old system when they saw what the alternative offered. Ambassador Yoon Seojin, now in her 9th decade, but showing no sign of the frailty age brought to lesser spirits, stood at the center platform where she had once delivered her final warning to a galaxy that refused to listen. Her hair had turned silver, and her face carried the lines of someone who had witnessed both the worst and best of what sentient beings could do. But her voice remained clear and strong. 50 years ago, I stood in this chamber and told you that you would regret what you were doing, she began, her words carrying to every corner of the assembly. I told you that fear was a poor foundation for policy, and I warned you that by the time you understood your mistake, it would be too late to undo what you had done. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. I was right about the fear, and I was right about the mistake. But I was wrong about one thing. Her expression softened into something that might have been forgiveness. I believed that when this moment came, you would face consequences that could not be undone. But I underestimated the capacity of the galaxy to change. She gestured to the diverse assembly before her, the living proof that something better was possible. You made us illegal because you feared what we might become. And you were right to be afraid. Her voice dropped to something quieter but no less powerful, but not for the reasons you imagined. She stepped back from the platform and nodded to Commander Park, who rose to address the assembly with the formal proposals that would establish the new galactic order. Thuven watched from her seat among the Peiyang Kalori delegation, thinking about the patterns she had once noticed in data that no one wanted to see. She thought about pirate fleets that had vanished and slave markets that had collapsed and extinct species that had somehow returned. All the quiet miracles that humanity had worked in the darkness while the galaxy looked the other way, and she thought about what it meant that a species cast out as dangerous had spent 50 years not building weapons of revenge, but building a home for everyone the galaxy had forgotten. The assembly voted to ratify the sanctuary accords by a margin so overwhelming that the few dissenting voices seemed almost quaint, echoes of an era that no longer held any power. As the votes were tallied and the new era officially began, Ambassador Yoon Seojin found herself standing at a window overlooking the stars, watching ships from 100 worlds arriving to witness history being made. Commander Park joined her, standing in comfortable silence until she spoke. Do you think they understand yet? She asked quietly. Park considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Some of them do, and others will learn, and a few will never accept what has happened. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. But that is enough, because we never needed everyone to understand. His eyes reflected the starlight as he watched the future arrive. We only needed enough of them to believe that something better was possible. Sojin nodded slowly. 50 years of exile and struggle and hope, finally settling into something that felt almost like peace. The galaxy paid the price, she murmured. But perhaps not too late after all. Outside the window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who lived among them, but bearing witness nonetheless to the moment when the galaxy finally learned what humanity had always known, that the measure of strength was not what you could destroy, but what you could build, and that the truest victory was the one that left room for everyone. Admiral Karath launched his attack on Sanctuary Prime with absolute confidence, his fleet surging through coordinates that Counselor Veth had provided with the certainty that surprise would overcome whatever defenses the humans had prepared. He was half right about the surprise, though not in the way he expected. the fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the precise coordinates indicated. Weapons charged and targeting systems active, ready to rain fire upon the human capital and end this war in a single decisive stroke. What they found instead was empty space. No planet, no stations, no defenses. Nothing but the cold vacuum between stars and the slowly dawning realization that they had been deceived. "Admiral," his center officer reported with a tremor in his voice, "we are detecting multiple emergence signatures behind us, and the count is still climbing." Karth turned to face the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in decades of military command. He felt fear ships were appearing all around his fleet, hundreds of them, emerging from hiding places that should not have existed and closing into a formation that left no avenue of escape. The voice that came over his communications was familiar, the same calm human tone that had warned him to turn back days ago. "Admiral Korath, this is Commander Park Minjae of the Sanctuary Compact, and I must admit I am disappointed." Park's voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed entirely genuine. "Counselor Veth gave you a choice between peace and war, and you chose to use her gift as a weapon rather than an opportunity." Korath's hands clenched on his command chair as he realized the full extent of his mistake. That intelligence was false. He growled, "Not entirely," Park replied. "The fleet positions were accurate as of 3 days ago, and the defense capabilities were genuine assessments of our standard forces. But the location of Sanctuary Prime was indeed fabricated specifically for this moment." The human paused, allowing the weight of the situation to settle fully on Karth's shoulders. "You came here to destroy our home, Admiral, and instead you have delivered your fleet directly into our hands." Karth ordered his ships to attack, knowing even as he gave the command that the tactical situation was hopeless. The battle was brief and devastating, but not in the way Karth expected. Sanctuary ships moved through his fleet like predators among prey, disabling engines and weapons with surgical precision while carefully avoiding any strikes that would cause fatal damage to cruise ship after ship went dark. Their systems shut down by weapons that seemed designed specifically to incapacitate rather than kill within hours. The greatest war fleet the Council had ever assembled was reduced to a collection of drifting hulks, their crews alive but helpless, awaiting whatever fate their captors chose to impose. Sakarth was taken from his flagship by a boarding party that treated him with more courtesy than he deserved. Escorted through corridors filled with species he had spent his career oppressing and brought before Commander Park on the bridge of the Sanctuary command vessel. "I expected execution," Korath said, his voice hollow with defeat. Park shook his head, a gesture the Admiral had learned meant negation among humans. "We do not kill those who have surrendered, Admiral, and we do not take pleasure in the suffering of our enemies." He gestured toward a display showing the disabled Council fleet. "Your crews will be returned to Council space along with their ships once we have removed their weapons, and they will carry with them a message for the Council leadership." "What message?" Korath asked. "That this war is over," Park replied. "That the Sanctuary Compact has no interest in conquest or revenge. But we will defend ourselves and our allies against any further aggression." He stepped closer to Korath, his eyes meeting the Admiral's with an intensity that made the Varanthi warrior look away, "and that every species the Council abandoned, enslaved, or declared extinct now stands with us, watching and waiting to see what choice the galaxy will make." The news of Korath's defeat reached the Council before his captured ships did, carried by emergency beacons and panicked reports from the handful of vessels that had escaped the trap. The response was not what the Council leadership had hoped. Species that had long chafed under Varanthi dominance began openly questioning the war, asking why their ships and soldiers should die fighting humans who had never threatened Council space. The Kalori government, already fractured by Veth's defection, collapsed entirely when evidence emerged that Council intelligence had been manipulating their political system for generations. The Vraxi Collective, whose labor had built half the Council's infrastructure, announced a general strike that brought shipping lanes to a standstill, and throughout Council space, broadcasts began appearing on frequencies that should have been secure. Human voices speaking in a dozen languages, offering sanctuary to any species willing to leave the Council's control. The broadcast did not threaten or demand. They simply invited, "You are not alone." The messages promised, "You have never been alone, and there is a place among the stars where your lives and your freedom matter more than your utility to those who claim to rule you." The effect was devastating. Refugee ships began streaming toward the Veil Expanse, carrying families and dissidents and dreamers who had given up hope of anything better until the humans reminded them that hope was still possible. Council worlds erupted in protests as citizens demanded to know why their government was fighting a war against people who seemed more interested in rescuing than conquering. The Varanthi hegemony, foundation of Council power for millennia, began to crack under the strain of maintaining control over allies who no longer believed in its authority. High Speaker Vara addressed the Council in an emergency session, his voice carrying none of its former certainty. "We face an enemy that does not fight as enemies should," he declared. "They defeat our fleets but do not kill our soldiers, and they undermine our authority but do not attack our worlds." He spread his forearms in a gesture of frustrated confusion. How do we defeat an enemy that refuses to be what we need them to be? No one in the chamber had an answer, because no one had ever faced a power that weaponized compassion more effectively than the Council had weaponized fear. The war was not over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The only question that remained was how much more the galaxy would have to lose before it accepted what humanity had already proven, that strength without mercy was just cruelty by another name, and that the Council's greatest weapon had always been convincing the galaxy that nothing better was possible. The humans had come back from exile to prove that belief wrong, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Korath of the Varanthi fleet stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars of the Veil Expanse spread before him like scattered diamonds on black velvet. He had been chosen to lead this campaign because of his reputation for ruthlessness, a reputation earned through decades of suppressing rebellions and enforcing Council authority on species that had forgotten their proper place. The humans would be no different, he assured himself. Just another inferior species that had gotten above itself and needed to be reminded of the natural order. His fleet had entered the Veil 3 days ago and had yet to encounter any resistance, which troubled his tactical officers but did not concern Korath in the slightest. "They are hiding," he announced to his senior staff during their morning briefing. "They know they cannot match our strength, and so they cower in whatever holes they have dug for themselves." His confidence lasted until the 5th day, when his advanced scouts reported something that made no sense according to everything the Council believed about the Veil Expanse. There were worlds ahead, not barren rocks or poisonous wastelands, but thriving planets covered in cities and farms and orbital stations, bustling with activity, and the inhabitants of those worlds were not just human scout. Imagery showed Kellery and Vraxi and Drath and dozens of other species walking alongside humans in what appeared to be perfect harmony. Species that had no business being in this region, and certainly no business cooperating with the exiled Humanskarath, studied the images with growing unease. His forearms twitching in a gesture his subordinates knew meant dangerous anger. "This is impossible," he muttered. "These species are loyal to the Council, and they would never ally themselves with humans." His intelligence officer, a younger Varanthi named Desik, cleared his throat nervously before responding, "Admiral, Our records indicate that many of these species were declared extinct or were relocated to labor colonies decades ago, and the Council has no explanation for their presence here. Korath turned his pale eyes on the officer with enough intensity to make Desic take an involuntary step backward. Are you suggesting that the humans somehow gathered up the garbage species the Council discarded and built some kind of civilization with them? Desic did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. The fleet pressed forward until they reached the first major world, a blue-green planet that sensors identified as supporting a population of several billion across multiple species. A single ship rose from the planet to meet them, a sleek vessel of unfamiliar design that positioned itself directly between the fleet and the world it was apparently defending. This is Commander Park Minjae of the Sanctuary Compact, a human voice announced over open channels. You have entered our territory without permission, and we require an explanation for your hostile posture. Korath laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across his bridge. I am Admiral Korath of the Galactic Council, and I require no permission to travel anywhere. For the Council's authority extends to all civilized space. The Sanctuary Compact does not recognize Council authority, Commander Park replied, his voice calm and unbothered by the 1,000 warships arrayed against him. We are an independent civilization comprising 47 species and 112 worlds, and we have no quarrel with the Council unless you choose to create one. Korath felt his confidence waver for just a moment at the numbers the human had quoted, but he pushed the doubt aside and responded with all the arrogance his position demanded. Humanity was banned from civilized space 50 years ago, and any human presence constitutes a violation of galactic law. So you will surrender immediately or face the consequences. The pause before Commander Park's response stretched long enough to make several officers shift uncomfortably at their stations. We are not asking for recognition, Admiral, and we are not requesting permission to exist. But we are offering you a choice that I strongly suggest you consider carefully. Park's voice hardened, losing its diplomatic smoothness. Turn your fleet around and return to Council space. Report that the Veil Expanse is occupied by a civilization that wishes only to be left alone, and this encounter can end peacefully. And if I refuse, Korath demanded, then you will learn why the Council was right to fear us, Admiral. Though not for the reasons they imagined, Korath ended the transmission and ordered his fleet into attack formation, confident that one small ship and whatever primitive defenses these exiles had assembled would crumble before Council might. He was wrong. The battle that followed lasted 6 hours and cost Korath nearly a third of his fleet before he finally ordered a retreat to regroup and reassess. The human ships did not fight like any enemy he had ever faced, appearing from nowhere, striking with surgical precision, and vanishing before his gunners could lock targets. They did not aim to destroy but to disable, crippling engines and weapons while leaving crews alive, capturing vessels whole rather than reducing them to debris. And they were not alone. Ships crewed by species the Council had written off as extinct or enslaved fought alongside the humans, with a ferocity that spoke of old grievances finally finding expression. Korath retreated to the edge of sanctuary space and sent a furious report back to the Council, demanding reinforcements and authorization to use planetary bombardment weapons. While he waited for a response, something unexpected happened. A small shuttle approached his flagship under a flag of truce, carrying a single passenger who requested permission to speak with the Admiral. The passenger was Kalori, one of the most respected species in the Council hierarchy, and she introduced herself as Counselor Veth of the reformed Kalori government in exile. I am here to offer you intelligence about the Sanctuary Compact, she told Korath in his private chambers. in exchange for asylum for my people when this war ends. Karth studied her with suspicious eyes. Why would a Kalori betray her own kind? Veth's luminous eyes flickered with something. That might have been shame, or might have been determination, because I have seen what the Council has become, Admiral, and I have seen what the humans have built, and I know which future I want my children to inherit. She handed him a data crystal containing fleet positions, defense capabilities, and the location of Sanctuary Prime, the human capital world. The Council will lose this war, she said quietly. But perhaps this information will help end it faster and with less bloodshed on both sides. Karth took the crystal and smiled, already planning the strike that would end the human threat once and for all. He did not notice the small smile that crossed Veth's face as she was escorted back to her shuttle, or the way her eyes lingered on the tactical displays showing the position of every ship in his fleet. The trap had been set, and the Admiral had walked into it with all the arrogance the Council had spent centuries cultivating. Now all that remained was to spring it. 50 years had passed since the last human ship vanished into the Veil Expanse, and the galaxy had long since stopped thinking about the species it had cast out. Huvin, of the Kalori species, sat in her small research office on the archive world of Nethris. Surrounded by data screens that glowed with information most of her colleagues considered worthless, she was young by Kalori standards, barely past her second century, and her obsession with pattern analysis had earned her a reputation as eccentric at best and unstable at worst. But Tuvin had noticed something that no one else seemed to care about. A series of small anomalies scattered across decades of galactic records that refused to make sense, no matter how she arranged them. The first anomaly was the pirate activity along the Outer Rim, which had declined by 73% over the past 4 decades, despite no increase in Council patrol presence. Second was the slave trade, once a thriving if officially condemned practice among certain Council species, which had collapsed almost entirely in the regions closest to the Veil Expanse. The third and strangest anomaly was the reappearance of species that the Council had declared extinct, showing up on frontier worlds with no explanation for how they had survived, or where they had been hiding. Thuvin had spent 3 years compiling her findings into a report that she believed would change how the Council understood the post-human galaxy instead. Her superiors had buried the report and suggested strongly that she find a new area of research. You are seeing patterns where none exist, Senior Archivist Melloc had told her, his luminous eyes dimming with disapproval. The humans are dead or dying in that wasteland they fled to, and these coincidences you have collected prove nothing. But Thuvin knew they were not coincidences, and she knew that something was happening in the darkness beyond. Council space that the authorities did not want to acknowledge. She was reviewing her data for the 100th time when the news alert flashed across her screen, announcing that the Drath Consortium had petitioned the Council for exclusive mining rights in the Veil Expanse. The Drath were among the most ruthless of Council species. Their economic empire built on the systematic exploitation of any world or people unfortunate enough to fall within their reach. Thuvin felt a chill run through her as she read the petition's justification, which claimed that long-range surveys had confirmed the Veil Expanse was empty of any significant intelligent presence. The humans were gone. The petition argued, either dead or reduced to scattered survivors too few to matter, and their abandoned space should be opened for productive development. 3 weeks later, the Council approved the petition by a comfortable margin, and the Drath Consortium assembled the largest mining fleet in galactic history to claim their new territory. Thuvin watched the fleet depart from her office window, 200 massive ships bristling with equipment, and, accompanied by a small armada of security vessels, she found herself whispering words she did not fully understand. As the ships vanished into faster-than-light travel, you have no idea what you are walking into. The consortium fleet entered the Veil Expanse on the 47th day of the third cycle, broadcasting their arrival on all frequencies and demanding that any surviving humans identify themselves for processing. No response came, but the fleet pressed forward according to their carefully planned survey routes on the third day. Long-range sensors began detecting anomalies that the consortium commanders could not explain. There were energy signatures in regions that should have been empty, communication signals using encryption methods that defied analysis, and ship movements at the edge of sensor range that vanished whenever pursuit was attempted on the seventh day. The fleet's lead vessel reported contact with an unknown craft that had appeared directly in their path. The transmission cut off mid-sentence, and when backup ships arrived at the location, they found nothing but empty space. Over the following week, ships began disappearing one by one, plucked from the fleet without warning or explanation. No distress signals, no debris, no bodies. Just empty coordinates where vessels had been moments before the consortium commander, a Drath warlord named Keswick, ordered the fleet to consolidate and prepare for combat against what he assumed must be human survivors with salvaged weapons. He was half right on the 15th day. The remaining consortium ships received a transmission on a frequency they had not known existed. The message was simple and delivered in perfect Drath language by a human voice. Your crews are unharmed and have been relocated to a garden moon with sufficient supplies to sustain them until rescue arrives, and your ships have been confiscated as compensation for your illegal entry into sanctuary space. The transmission continued with coordinates for the garden moon and a final warning. Leave now and do not return, for this is the only mercy you will receive. Keswick refused to believe what he was hearing and ordered his remaining ships to advance toward the signal source. 12 hours later, he woke up on a beautiful moon covered in forests and rivers, surrounded by his entire crew, with no memory of how he had gotten there. Council received word of the consortium's fate through a Drath emergency beacon that had been left on the garden moon along with the stranded crew. Thuven read the report with trembling hands. Our worst suspicions confirmed beyond any possibility of denial. The humans had not died in the Veil Expanse. They had been waiting. She requested an immediate audience with the council to present her findings and warn them about what she believed was coming. But her request was denied without explanation. The council had already made its decision, and that decision was War High Speaker Varoth addressed the assembly with fury burning in his pale eyes, declaring that the consortium attack was an act of aggression that demanded the harshest possible response. The human remnants have revealed themselves as the threat we always knew them to be, he thundered, and they must be eliminated before they can threaten civilized space. The vote for military action passed with only a handful of dissents, and the council began assembling the largest war fleet in Galactic history. Thuven sat in her office that night, staring at the data that no one had wanted to see, thinking about the extinct species that had somehow returned, and the slave markets that had somehow collapsed, and the pirates that had somehow vanished. She thought about 50 years of silence, and what kind of civilization could be built in that time by a species known for adapting to anything, and she wondered, not for the first time, whether the council truly understood what it was about to face. The war fleet departed 3 months later, 1,000 ships carrying enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. Confident that human survivors could not possibly stand against such overwhelming force, Thuven watched them go and felt something she had not expected. She felt afraid, but not for the humans. She was afraid for everyone else. The great chamber of Varantos Station hummed with the voices of 1,000 species. But Ambassador Yoon Seo-jin stood alone at the center platform. Her back straight and her hands steady at her sides, she had known this day would come for years now. Watching the political winds shift against her people with each passing cycle. But knowing something and facing it were two different beasts entirely. The Varanti High Speaker rose from his elevated throne, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that demanded silence from the assembled council representatives. "The vote has been counted," he announced, his translated voice booming through every corner of the chamber. "And the Galactic Council has reached its decision by a margin of 732 to 114. Sojin did not flinch, though she felt the weight of those numbers press against her chest like a physical thing. "The Sapien Exclusion Act is hereby ratified," the High Speaker continued, and murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber like waves across a dark ocean. "Humanity is declared a destabilizing influence upon galactic order and is henceforth banned from all council space effective immediately." The word "banned" echoed in Seojin's mind as she watched delegates from dozens of worlds nod their approval, their alien faces showing satisfaction at finally solving the problem that humanity had become in their eyes. She remembered when humans had first made contact with the galaxy, full of wonder and hope, believing they had found a community of minds among the stars. How naive they had been. The Kilori delegate, a slender being with luminous eyes, rose to speak in support of the act, her voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone reading from prepared remarks. "Humans expand too quickly," she declared. "They adapt to environments that should kill them, and they breed at rates that threaten to overwhelm established territories within mere generations." Another delegate, this one from the insectoid Vraxi collective, added his voice to the chorus of condemnation. "They interfere with natural hierarchies," he clicked. "We have documented 17 instances of humans providing technology and resources to primitive species that should have remained under proper guidance." Seojin knew what proper guidance meant in council terms, having seen the mining colonies where so-called primitive species worked themselves to death extracting resources for their supposed benefactors. Accusations continued for what felt like hours, each speaker adding another grievance to the mountain of complaints. Against her species, humans were too curious and asked too many questions about things that were not their concern. Humans formed bonds too easily and could not understand the proper boundaries between species. Humans had the disturbing habit of treating all sentient beings as equals regardless of their place in the galactic hierarchy. When the last speaker had finished his denunciation, the High Speaker turned his pale eyes toward Seojin and gestured with one of his lower arms. "The human representative may now address the council before the enforcement terms are announced." Seojin climbed the steps to the speaking platform with measured grace, feeling the eyes of the galaxy upon her as she took her place before the assembly that had just declared her entire species unwelcome among the stars. She paused for a long moment, looking out at the faces before her, some triumphant, some uncomfortable, a few even showing what might have been shame. "I will not beg," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I will not plead for reconsideration or ask what crimes we have committed to deserve exile." The chamber grew quieter as delegates leaned forward to hear her words. "You have made your reasons clear enough," Seojin continued. "We adapt too well, and we grow too fast, and we care too much about beings you believe should remain beneath notice." She let those words hang in the air for a moment before pressing on. "We came to the stars with open hands and open hearts, believing that intelligence implied wisdom and that age implied compassion." Her gaze swept across the assembled representatives, lingering on those who had spoken most forcefully against her people. "We were wrong about that, but we do not regret the error, for it taught us something valuable about the nature of this galaxy and about ourselves." The High Speaker shifted in his throne, clearly uncomfortable with where this address was heading. "Humanity accepts the Council's decision," Seojin declared. We will withdraw from your space within the allotted time, and we will not resist your enforcement measures." Relief washed across many faces in the chamber, delegates exchanging glances of satisfaction at this unexpected compliance. "But I will leave you with this warning," Seojin said, and her voice dropped to something harder, something that made several delegates lean back in their seats despite themselves. "You are making this decision out of fear, and fear is a poor foundation for policy." She raised her hand to forestall the objections already forming on alien lips. "You fear what we might become, what we might change, what we might inspire in those you prefer to keep beneath your notice." The High Speaker rose from his throne, his forearms folding in a gesture of dismissal. "The human representative has exceeded her allotted time. Then I will be brief," Seojin replied, not moving from her position. "You are casting us out because you believe the galaxy is better off without us. And perhaps you are right." She smiled then, a small sad expression that confused many of the delegates watching. "But perhaps you are very, very wrong, and by the time you discover which truth holds, it will be far too late to undo what you have done here today." With those words, she stepped down from the platform and walked toward the chamber doors, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over the assembly. No one moved to stop her, and no one spoke until the doors had closed behind her, and she had vanished from their sight. 3 months later, the last human ships crossed beyond the outer rim into the region the Council called the Veil Expanse, a vast stretch of space considered too hostile and too empty for any civilized species to survive. The Council watched them go with relief and satisfaction, confident that they had solved the human problem once and for all. In the years that followed, humanity became a cautionary tale told to young delegates, a reminder of what happened to species that grew too fast and reached too far and failed to understand their proper place in the galactic order. The empty human colonies were reclaimed and stripped of anything valuable, their cities demolished and their farms converted to industrial operations serving council interests within a generation. It was as if humanity had never existed at all. Their brief presence among the stars erased like footprints in shifting sand, but deep in the Veil Expanse, beyond the reach of council censors and far from the eyes that had judged them unworthy. Humanity was not dying as the galaxy expected. They were building something new. Something born from exile and tempered by betrayal. Something that would one day return to remind the Council of the warning they had chosen to ignore. Ambassador Yoon Seojin, older now but no less determined, stood on the bridge of the colony ship that would become the foundation of their new civilization and looked out at the uncharted stars before them. "They made us illegal," she said quietly to the officers gathered around her. "They decided we had no place among them and cast us into the darkness." Her eyes hardened with resolve as the ship moved deeper into the unknown. "Let us show them what grows in the dark."